Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga. Kia mākene ki uta, kia mātaratara ki tai. Kia hi ake ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hauhunga. Haumie, huie, taiki. Kia ora koutou, nau mai, haere mai, and welcome to this session, the title of which is Visual Art and Storytelling, a title that I seem to have a lot of trouble remembering. Not sure why, but somehow the words just kind of don't work together always, or certainly not in that order. I'd like to first of all thank Michelle Alvey for putting this series together as part of the lead up to National Flash Fiction Day on the 22nd of this month. And for National Flash Fiction Day and all the work that she and her team have done behind the scenes. My name's Moata McNamara, and I come originally, I whakapapa to Waima, a small settlement in the Hokianga Harbour, most beautiful place in the world, and I'm sure some of you will disagree with that. But I'm currently living in Whangaparaoa, which is out of my rohe, and I'd just like to acknowledge the haukainga of Whangaparaoa. I'm an artist and writer, and certainly both storytelling and visual art in all its forms have figured in my life largely for the last heaven knows how many years. This is a small and I'm really looking forward and very excited about the diversity in this panel. We've got artists from very different disciplines and writers, artists and writers, if you can make that distinction. And I think this promises to be a really exciting kōrero. I have to refer to my notes, I'm afraid, because my memory sometimes fails me. So the intersection between art and storytelling is what we're looking at. And what will happen here is each artist will introduce themselves and give a reading or read through their artwork or through a piece of artwork. And I have here a rākau kōrero, which was carved for me by my husband Mina Mitai from Te Arawa. And I'd like to virtually pass this rākau kōrero around. So while you're speaking, you're holding the rākau kōrero virtually. So to set off on this journey and on this conversation, I'd like to first of all pass the rākau kōrero to you, Anton. Kia ora.
Tēnā rā tātou katoa, ko Hikurangi te maunga, ko Waipu te awa, ko Ngāti Porou te iwi, ko Anton Blanc aho. I hail from the east coast of the North Island, from a small village called Rangichukia, which is about a 30-minute drive from Ruatoria, which is where my mother was born. She was one of the first Māori writers to write in English and te reo Māori, and was the first Māori to win a Catherine Mansfield Award. So it's my mother who passed away in 2002, and my father, Pius, was a Swiss migrant who immigrated to Aotearoa in 1952. And my father was a photographer when he first came to New Zealand, and spent a lot of time photographing my mother, which led me into my own journey of visual storytelling. Because one of the first books I have a small publishing operation, and one of the first books I published was a collection of my mother's writing, accompanied by my father's photographs. So I'm going to just give you a quick look at what that looked like. So here's the cover of the book. So this is my parents on their honeymoon. And the photo on the back of Arapera, my mother, under the parasol, is one of my favourite images of her, and is also used on her tombstone in Rangitukia. So I was kind of, just by nature of the work that we'd collected as a family in terms of mum's writing and dad's photography, that just automatically led me into this space. And I think here's from the inside of the book. So mum's writing about her feet. So we were kind of able to complement the text with images. And then the next sample is my own short story collection, which is a Global Roaming, which I published in 2019. And the designer Jeannie DeWitt brought this lovely kind of, I like the kind of modernist pared back cover. And then in the inside, she really experimented with the text, and it gives quite a different kind of reading experience. She did a really clever job of that. And I think what I've learned as a result of this is to trust what partners bring to the table, what their creative contribution is. And I also publish a Māori literary journal once every couple of years. The last issue, which was published last year, was a collaboration with Indigenous Taiwanese writers and artists. And this is an example of some of the Taiwanese art. Again, we were able to match image with text. So the eyes of the earth, and obviously we can see that in the art that accompanies it. And then this is another example. The photographer Amy Ratana, we used her images. And here we have Jean Ricky, who lives in Australia and has lived there for years. On the other side, it's really fitting for Jean because she is this kind of modern international kind of voice. So that's just an example of some of the work that I've been involved in. And I'm happy to lose the screen share now.
Kia ora, Anton. It's wonderful hearing about the way that you're working now is so related to your whakapapa. It's in your bones, that synergy and that meeting place of art and storytelling has been what shows.
Yeah, then my sister is, I mean, I'm a creative writer, a writer of creative nonfiction, publisher. My sister is also a poet, so we're kind of like a family of writers, and we're now carrying the baton from, we're carrying the baton from mum.
Yeah, lovely. Kia ora. And if we can now move on to Ashley. Ashley, passing over the rapa kōrero.
Thank you. I think I'm going to share the screen briefly and see if I can get that one up.
Wow.
Can you see that?
That's working well.
I've got some. Okay. So I'm not sure. I can't see it.
We can see it, Ashley.
Really cool.
Sorry. Yeah, very cool. No, don't be sorry.
I was born in South Africa and obviously grew up in the colonial world, and that alongside the sort of effect of the Industrial Revolution, we produced several installations in museums and that dealt with the naivety of the Victorian mindset and the imperialism. And so we had several traveling shows that moved around the country and pretty much included like electricity and sound and kinetic movement, so and a variety of things. So it was it's a pretty interesting time, like creating work from using the detritus of the industrial age. as mediums in which to create the artwork. So then these works were exhibited alongside Victorian paintings. So it was the contrast of the two. Then sort of around about 2002, I moved to Canada. And of course, you move into a completely different zone. And I sort of became more focused on environmental issues. So the particular painting that you're looking at is called Finn, and is sort of, it's a metaphorical exposition of the idea of the finish, the end of the world, but at the same time, the shark fin trade. So that's what that element was all about. In connection with this particular project, the book A Kind of Shelter, I produced something. So what you're looking at with this image is more. It's about 20 foot long and 8 foot tall, but I moved a little bit away from that. My idea was to loosen identity, thinking that we're in our ways of communicating artistically. If you get too located in an object and in the subject, in a way, you're almost not allowing yourself to speak. So my goal became to loosen identity, and in that respect, I became aware of how we actually see and how we think we see. So in that way, like we're almost like caught in Descartes' way of understanding in the dualism. And his idea was that there was this person or homunculus somewhere, and then there was the brain. And his relationship to animals were, well, they didn't have a soul. So you could operate on them and cut things off, and that was just a mechanical thing. So it's obviously quite wrong. And I think in a way it's one of the major downfalls of our particular way of looking at things now. So we need to re-examine that. And I think Descartes built his structure on the idea that there was some geometrical correlation between what we could see and what we could measure and what reality was. But in actual fact, our concept of self, there's a neurologist, it's actually a pseudonym, his name's Antonio Damasio, and he's written a book called, well, he's written a couple. First one was called Descartes' Error, and the second one is called The Self Comes to Mind. And the importance of that is that we don't have a self, we invent that self. And we
Sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to keep this part a bit short so that we can get into some deeper discussion later. And I just wanted to thank you for bringing up the politics of the area that we're discussing, and I'm sure that we'll get into that in more depth later.
I can.
So, thank you, Ashley.
Okay.
If you don't mind, we'll just leave it there and move on, and then we can get into some more discussion around that later.
Okay.
So we move on, and I hand the rākau kōrero to Jennifer. Kia ora, Jennifer.
Kia ora koutou. My name's Jennifer Halley, and I was raised in what I like to call the wilds of South Carolina. I'm Peripateic in nature, so I found my way to where I live now, which is Namutu, New Plymouth. And I got here by the way of Kafia, Massachusetts, Missouri, New Jersey, North Carolina, Montana, Melbourne, Cardella, Wellington, Fielding, Tennessee, Colorado, and Pennsylvania. So I've been around a little bit. I'm a printmaker and a ceramicist, and I own an art project space in central Namutu called Might Could. And it's Might Could as in, it's a Southern expression. Like if you ask me if I could do something for you, my answer might sound something like, well, I might could do that. So it's a lot like the yana. Yep. Let's see, my artwork draws on inspiration of this Antipodean mindset of being from two places, so living between two lands, and the memory of place, the man-made, and also having a very Catholic upbringing. If you'd like to, I could show you an image now, or I could save that until later, or do
whatever you prefer.
Okay, I'll just show you just for a bit of context. I'll just pop up a portion of my screen. And that's just, there you go. Can you see that one? So this is a colograph and woodblock print. It's titled Blue Skying. And the statement I wrote for it reads, blue is the place between two lands, the place you can never go. Living a layered life between two such places, sometimes it feels closer than others. Often I leave my statements really quite short, and I like little pithy poems and things like that. But this one, I wrote a little bit more about it. So it's a colograph and a woodblock on Taikozo paper. The colors are a concoction of a transparent ink, blue pigment, iron sand, palm ash, and terracotta. Blue skying is about dreaming. It's about dreaming about a life that once was, or a life that could have been. Aotearoa was the last place she traveled to before she died. And Aotearoa was the first place I traveled to after she died. So it's to my sister, who's now buried in South Carolina in a place called Traveler's Rest, an apt place where the earth is renowned for this really sticky, rich iron red terracotta, and a dusting or a pinch of that I put into all of my inks, so all of my pieces. So yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Kia ora, Jennifer. I love that you've included the earth and place into your works. Can you talk a bit more about that, just briefly?
Yeah, so it probably comes from me moving around a lot. It also comes from being a ceramicist. So I'm a trained potter. I have a master's in ceramics, even though I mostly work in printmaking now. And it was a way for me to transfer this, always working with different clays and different clay bodies everywhere I go, and transferring that into my printmaking processes. But also in Catholic upbringing, Catholicism is full of these objects, you know, so like you grow up with these objects everywhere, and there are small little medals that have saints often, or they're from a sacred place. And on the front one might be a saint, and on the back of it, there'll be a little bit like a little bulb of glass, and inside of it will just be a tiny pinch of soil from sacred places. Yeah, so it draws on both of those ideas.
Kia ora. We'll talk a bit more about that, or go into that a bit deeper later too, about land and place. So now I hand the rākau kōrero to you, Maureen.
Ora koutou. He ori o Te Hikatu ki Hokianga ahau. I was born in Rawani, and I'm actually planning to go back there next year to do a 2-month residency in a little church halfway up the main street. If any of you know Rawani, you might be able to envisage that. I'm really looking forward to it. Hokianga is my returning place, as it says in its name, and I've returned there on and off all my life, and lived there for a while. My background as an artist is mainly in installation art and weaving. People think of me as a weaver because I do spend a lot of time with the weavers, and I know a lot about weaving. I was a lecturer at Māori Studies for quite a few years at Auckland University, and my specialty was researching and was knowledge recovery, really, researching fibre art in museums and bringing back old techniques. So you may have heard of the group that come from Te Hikatu. We're based in Te Hikatu, that have just recreated a rā, the size of the one in the British Museum, which is coming to New Zealand. And so it will be on show at the museum later this year. So that's one of my specialities. It's really, my art too is based on research, materials, processes, whakapapa, and place. So if we could have the image, I'm just going to talk about a piece of work which was published in a kind of shelter, whakaruru taha, which isn't actually an artwork at all. It's like a window into a much bigger story and a much bigger artwork. They asked me for a title for this, and so I just said, oh, it's Aho for Hinetitama. And this was part of the process of making a work called Atapo, which I did in collaboration with the Mataho Collective. And you may have seen it in Toi Tu Toi Ora in the Grey Gallery. I don't think you could have missed it if you went into the Grey Gallery. It was a very large piece. All I give you in the book is the title that says Aho for Hinetitama. I don't give you anything else, so it's a bit of a teaser. So I just want to investigate that title. Aho, as you may know, has layers of meaning, just as a lot of Maori words do have. So aho, if you go to Williams Dictionary, you can usually see the layers of meaning. It means string, line, weft threads in a cloak. It relates to geniality. So the line you come down on might be a particular line, an aho tahahu, like a main line. And there's a lot of words relating to aho. Aho tapu is like a sacred first weft row when you're doing tānako. It's also, on another level, is a medium for an atua. So if you think about binding, if you think of a god stick, the god stick is dormant until it has the binding on it. That's the pathway for the atua to enter the object. And through the Pacific, muka, cordage, binding behaves in that way, so do feathers. They can indicate the presence of an atua. So we're starting to see that this is not just threads for me. There's a lot of other meanings. It also means radiant light, and light is something I spend a lot of time thinking about when I do installation. It means to shine. And from working with it, I know that it has enormous strength. You could take one of those strands and probably not be able to break it because it is incredibly strong. So the one at the top is the natural color, the white. And these have been dyed, and that relates to the other part of the title, Hinetitama. Now, who was Hinetitama? If we Google it, we'll probably come up with an image by Robin Kahukiwa, in which is her depiction of Hinetitama. And that's what most young children or people will know from reading the stories. And in that depiction, she is called the Dawn Maid. And so the information that you'll get if you Google it or go somewhere like that will be along the lines of Hinetitama is the daughter of Tane and Hene Ahuone. Hene Ahuone, who was formed from the earth. Hinetitama ultimately became Hinenui Tapu, the goddess of the dead, when she fled to the underworld after discovering that her husband, Tane, was also her father. That's quite a heavy topic, and they don't really go into it in any more detail than that. So that's probably the story that most people will know. And it's a big story, and it's a very old story, right back to the beginning. So the other way of spelling Hinetitama is sometimes Hinetimata. Happened with her mother too. Hine Ahuone was sometimes called Hine Hauone, like where the life was breathed into the earth, or the earth came to life. So Hine Timata would have a meaning of the first woman. And she does carry that meaning. She was the first woman, and she started our whakapapa. I'm going to read you something out of Ngā Motiatia 3, which is available, readily available. If you want to get to the crux of a Maori myth, you have to go back to the one that's maybe 13 generations old before this book was published. And so it's come down as an oriori and been then translated onto manuscripts. It was, it's by Tu Hoto Araki, a high priest of Ngāti Tara. Ngāti Tara is from Whanganui a Tara, which is Wellington. And this was composed for his grandson. It is called Ori Ori Mo Tu Tere Moana. It's the first song in that book, which is part 3 of the Ngā Motiatia. And it gives, it's a very rich look at all the creation mythology in a very poetic form. And it's translated and with notes by Te Whatahora, who's also written little explanations about what's in that song. And this is where I just want to do a reading from, relating to the work that we did, because this was very influential to go back past the stories collected by people by Gray and maybe given a sort of a colonial twist, or usually a Christian one. So he, in his notes on page 15, he says, Hiniti Tama was so distressed because her own father, Tane the parent, had committed incest with her, and she separated from him, changed into the form of a cloud, and finally vanished completely. And this is where my little image, if we put it back on, is sort of a little bit reminiscent of the cloud that vanished completely. It is the dawn, it could be the dawn, and maybe that's where she got the name from the dawn, being the dawn maid, because she maybe was the time that she turned into a cloud and vanished. And that was the reason why death came to mankind in this world. Her name on earth was Hine, the maid deceived by the male, Hine Titama. On her descent to the world hereafter, she was named the Great Lady of the Night, Hine Nui Te Pō. And that's not the goddess of death. That's the goddess of the person who looks after the dead when they go there. She is the goddess of the night. So that's another story which I won't go into here, but it's one that we addressed in our big work called Article. So I just thought I'd bring that up because they weren't pulling any punches, they were calling it incest. They weren't saying, as some of the stories that were saying, that she was so full of shame. I think she realized what had happened. She took agency. It was a light bulb moment for her. And so I would just like to retranslate that word whakamā as not shame, but as a light bulb moment where you see the light. To see the light, ma. So I just want to put that in there because those are the kinds of things I'm interested in that underpin my work, and the work has those kind of layers in it, whereas it can be just there's something as simple as a whole bunch of threads for me to put onto that work, which it also is.
Kia ora, Whaia. Kia ora. I got so carried away with that, I could listen to you all day. It was there's just beautiful moments in your kōrero that, particularly about the way stories from the past can influence the art that you're making, and that you're still telling that story again and again and again, remembering and always holding the past in front of us. So kia ora for that, Maureen. I'd like to pass the rākau kōrero to you, Noa Noa. Waiting patiently. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Kia ora. So my name is Noa Noa from Busevitz, and my first name Noa Noa comes from Tahiti, but actually, although many of my friends are quite confused and go, does this make you Tahitian? My mother is Māori, but she was whāngaid. So in terms of being able to whakapapa anywhere on my mother's side, that is, I am an interestingly rootless Māori, which is an interesting position to be in New Zealand. And with my last name from Busevitz, my father is German. So Anton, I share sort of a similar interesting connection with New Zealand and with the other side of the world in my history. And with a curious little bit like a fon in a German name, it means that I can look back to about the 1200s to see the whakapapa of my German family. So my background is actually in anthropology. So I trained as an anthropologist, which is a very, it's an interesting discipline in that it is both very useful and also very, it has a very conflicting background. So it's always going to sit as both something which that has some benefit and also lots of conflicting aspects to it. But I particularly focused on the anthropology of art. So along the way with my sort of with my art making, I noticed that there are various aspects of purely of culture really that kind of come through in my art making. Similar also to you, Anton, my mother is a poet, my father is a writer. So there's these aspects in my background. And for a very, very long time, I was, although often referred to in my family as the artist, I was the person who went, I don't want to be an artist because the idea of being kind of a starving artist trope sounded really difficult to me. And I was going, I'd like to actually have a different life. And then later in my life, once my children were getting older, going, actually, I'm going to stop having this kind of teenage attitude of shooting myself in the foot and actually get on with doing what it is that I love doing, which is coming back to the topic of storytelling, to tell stories through art. So the way in which I learned my second language, which is German, was through comics. My father is an amazing language teacher. He speaks 6 languages himself, and my grandfather spoke 12. But he knew that the way in order to get this language into me was to have some kind of hook. And an amazing comic book is an incredibly good hook for getting someone to learn something. So for me, in terms of the way in which I make art, I remember there used to be, I think it was a book that my mother had, which was talking about children and art making, because my mother was also an art teacher for many, many years. And it was that, what have you drawn? Was often what people would ask children. And so as a child, other children would always ask me, what are you drawing? And I would have to say, wait, right now I'm drawing. Afterwards, I will look at what I'm drawing. Then I can tell you what I've drawn, because in my head, as I am drawing, or nowadays as a printmaker, as I am creating art, there is a story that is evolving in my mind that will continue through a series. The story unfolds through the making. So in terms of my process, sometimes I start with an idea I want to tell, but frequently it is about the process of making art turning into the story, which I can then see as a story when the art is completed. So perhaps, Michelle, if I could ask you to pop up an image of my print Talk Talk. This is an image of a print from a series which I do you have Talk Talk, Michelle? It is a pink image. This one here is Kani Kani. We might have, if not, I have it here as an image. But it is a print which was from an exhibition called The Taniwha of Te Ako. So Te Ako is on the far side of the Raglan Harbour. And when I came to the space, I had an incredibly powerful feeling of connection with the space. And the only way that I could make sense of connecting with this space was to make art, to try and turn the feeling of connection into an image of connection. So this one here is called Talk Talk. It's it feels somewhat more, possibly violent is the word because of the pink, but it isn't violent. It was about exploring this feeling of connection with a space. So when I finish making any art piece, I have a final part of my art making process, which is to look at what I have created and I write my own aspect of story for it. It's not the only story. Other viewers can come up with completely different things, but it is my end piece of my process. So for this one here, the story, for lack of a better way of describing it, is this. History is unpacked here. Influences have become icons, symbols to tell a story, like in comics. Yes, of course, a lifetime of speech bubbles, but these are empty. Words are not needed when you can read the body. Bunny and Penguin are the protagonists. Ideologies have become like religion, causing separation. What we need is the illumination of the flower's sun, monoliths, horses, lions, and more pomegranate seeds, rebirthing light out of darkness. Fairy tales are made to be retold. So much talk, talk. Thank you. So yes, art making, storytelling, it's they're interwoven in my process, but I can leave it there as a sort of a start in the conversation.
Kia ora noa, and that really leads us into a discussion about where in your process storytelling fits. And I'd like to just mention that all of you have in your kōrero have brought up about how whakapapa works into your artworks or your art practice or in some way. So can we I'll just put it out there and you can all kind of leap in. Just going back to your short phrase, noa of history unpacked from the piece that you read. And can we have some discussion around that, about how for each of you, history is unpacked in your making, whether it be writing or making of art, which is the same thing really in lots of ways.
Well, I was interested in what Ashley was talking about with this Descartes idea of, constructing an identity. So, identity is not a fixed phenomena, that it's constantly evolving and changing. And I think for all of us, what I picked up, and certainly what I'm quite conscious of in terms of writing and publishing, is I'm actually proposing that, particularly around the Māori identity, I'm giving a proposition of this is one way of looking at it, and hopefully it's a new way of looking at it.
Can you go on? Can you elaborate a bit more on that, Anton?
Well, so I think sort of with Mum's book, it was really unexpected, because when my parents had a very volatile, difficult relationship. But when we looked through the archive of photos and put them next to the writing, what we ended up was this very kind of joyful narrative across the words and across the photographs, which was certainly one aspect of their relationship. But I think in terms of the images that we had access to, that was like that was the concentrated energy of the images was joy. So that brought that aspect of the relationship into the narrative. But obviously, it was a very complex, difficult and amazing relationship. But joy would be the kind of the strongest narrative from the book. which was a really nice way to remember them. And obviously, like every family, there's darkness and light, but to actually come out of it with this really delightful kind of object was really amazing, and a nice way to kind of close our memories about our parents.
Anyone else? Getting back to your kōrero, Ashley.
I think just to harp on a bit about it again, I think when we look at things, we're actually projecting, we're not absorbing. And so what I realized with some of my new paintings, I realized that we're actually in a kind of habituation. And if we wanted to change our world, we have to recognize that and find ways of reimagining. So for me, the imagination is actually the primary thing, and rationality and consciousness are actually just figments of that. So what I did with these new works was that I made an a priori decision that every intuitive move I made had to be either ambiguous or contradictory. And in that way, I ended up with something quite interesting. With the works that should be, according to the way people think about art, you shouldn't be able to look at it. It should be just confusing. But in actual fact, it's not. It becomes more illuminating, and you almost create a world that is constantly changing. So, like if some form in that picture had an identity, and you looked around the picture, by the time you came back to that place, that identity has shifted and it's flipped. So I found that quite interesting, because I think we need to see the imagination as primary in our mind.
I see you nodding there, Jennifer.
I was thinking, I've been a self-employed artist only for a few years now. And so like I've taken, I guess, with me all these experiences over my lifetime. And what I've made is actually quite surprising to me, like what has come out of my life and out of years and years of reflection. I worked for some artists before, and one of the things they always said is kind of before you can make good work is you have to give yourself time to rest, which is in ceramics, I thought was a really lovely, saying, and a lovely way of, absorbing all these experiences of your life to the point where you are today. But and like you said, and that is a lot of reflection, about where you've been, and I guess how then your experiences can relate to other people, and how you maybe can tell your own story, but then that touches other people and relates to other people.
Can we come back to, I'd like to come back to what you said before, Noa, and I think I've got the quote right here. The evolution of the story through the making. Can you talk a bit more about that?
It ties in nicely with it. I think it is that tying in with both what you said, Ashley, and what you said, Jennifer, is that there is that aspect of what you bring with you, but also leaving certain things sufficiently ambiguous, because of course you bring your own things to your creation, to your creativity. But it's also really nice to sort of leave it sufficiently open that other people can see what they see in it. And that there's that kind of the ability for you to kind of transmit an aspect of, it's almost like an energy that you're able to transmit, that somebody can then connect with the energy of an idea, either through color or through the movement or through placement, which creates an interesting kind of relationship between what you might have originally thought you were trying to put out into the world and what other people take away from it themselves. So in what you were saying, actually, with what people see is what they want to see. I just recently made some new work And I showed them to my husband, and in my mind, it was two figures in an embrace. And in his mind, it was something completely different. And even if I traced the pieces with, going, this is an arm, and he's going, I really love it, but I don't see what you see. And it's going, actually, that's great. But for me, it is very much about the process of finding those initial lines and then seeing where they take you, because that's actually kind of what keeps it interesting and exciting for me as well, is that I'm always finding something new, and often finding out something new about myself in the process. So it's actually not in a kind of therapeutic way necessarily, but in a sort of becoming more of oneself. It sort of helps to kind of create, it helps me to see a new picture. Not meaning that in a pun kind of way, but no, and I think over the last little while, the thing that I've been enjoying the most is that having kind of created a style that I enjoy, but actually kind of going, I enjoy it, I've got to a certain place with it, but now I really need the freedom to be able to play again with a new way of making, that there is this lovely sort of freedom that comes out of having a new medium to play with that allows for different kinds of strokes and therefore a different kind of energy to emerge from it as well. So I think it's a difficult thing when art becomes this thing that you try to sell to make a living and these sorts of things, and the balance between that and then also just allowing it to be this kind of creative, imaginative world that you get to sort of explore. Because I think also the more authentically you kind of dive into that, then it might not appeal to everybody, but to some people you'll have that kind of connection where they go, yes. Some of the works that I did in relation to Te Ako, some of the locals are like, this is a very bizarre piece, but yes, you have somehow got the essence of this place in here. It's not a landscape, it's not an image of a person, but there is a feeling within it that they could connect with in terms of that place, which was really the most wonderful sort of feedback I think I've ever had from people who've lived somewhere for 30 years to go, I'm trying to give back something to this place I find really beautiful through sharing my love of what I'm seeing as a feeling.
That comes back in a kind of a circular way to what you were saying in your piece in A Kind of Shelter, Ashley, when you were talking about the art world. And I wonder if without the art world, how we would get these pieces, these stories out there. Is there a way of getting them out there without the art world as it exists?
I think we have to reinvent that, because the art world is stifling us. It's you have to produce something that can be turned into for sale, or has to be auctioned off for very wealthy people. It's that's nothing to do with art. Art's about it's about imagination. It's a way of thinking, and I find it so stifling when I have to consider trying to sell something. It's almost like not worth doing it. You know, I'm fully on board with that. Yeah.
So just continuing on from that, because this is a question that I've asked myself for years about ways of telling our stories that don't involve the Western art world as it exists now.
Yeah.
Is anyone using? I know that Whaia Maureen, your art gets out there in a whole host of different ways. And how do you see that? How does the art world, the Western art world of galleries and sales, how do you relate to that, or do you relate to that?
I relate to context and space, and I find like a gallery space doesn't give me much. I like to do work in museums, and in fact my doctoral program was all about that. But given a space like the Grey Gallery, and I have got an image here, which is the Auckland Art Gallery. And for those of you who saw that work, that's our depiction of Hinenui Te Pō in the space. And what we're doing there is converting that very colonial space into maybe the entrance to the inside of a meeting house, which is often the body of the female ancestor of the house. And she may be spread leg across the door lintel as you go in underneath, and you're entering into her body, which is what Maui tried to do with Hinenui Te Pō. But it's a dangerous space, you know, to go through over the paipai. It's a change of state. So in this, we're making that change of state. You come through, you triggered the sound of Pe Waka Waka, which was a warning that you were entering a dangerous space. Hine Chitama was in behind. So you can get the glimmer of light, and then you can go through into the light. And so she had to go through two levels. This was the top level that you saw the aho for, but she goes down through the second apse down below that into Rarohenga. So we're taking that very colonial art gallery space, which does actually give us some amazing architecture, and turning it into something that works for our story. And as for selling work, I think that's why I was a lecturer for so long. It gave me the freedom to not have to sell work. Who do you sell work like this to? If the art gallery won't buy it, then nobody's going to buy it. And they haven't bought it. So it just is in storage. And a lot of my work is in storage. But it's starting to get out there again. It's starting to be re-exhibited. And what I find hard is people pick the eyes out of it if they do collect it. And then it's a central piece from a bigger installation. Then I think it's not the artwork, it's become an artifact. Just like all the things in museums have become artifacts. They do have backstories, but they've become separated from them. And so it's just kind of how the life of an artwork, for my type of artwork anyway, the story gets either lost or it doesn't make sense anymore unless you can put it back into its original context.
I think you know, what we're doing as artists and writers is much more dynamic than storytelling. I think you know, we're all centrally concerned with identity, and we're proposing alternative ways of looking at identity. So when I look at my dad's photographs, Dad had this very kind of modernist lens and view. He really believed in the potential of Māori students because he was a teacher. So you really see that through the images and through Mum's text. And, you know, I don't know that we often think about this aspect of joy and achievement as part of the Māori experience, and yet that's what I see people get from the book, and they're surprised by it and they're delighted by it. And I'm delighted to bring that delight, sort of to be the channel for that joy.
Yeah, I'd just like to go back to what Noano was saying about how actually it's the person who responds that kind of, how I'm reading it, is it kind of completes the meaning of a work. So it's dynamic in that way, and people don't have to own a work to remember it.
No.
Mm.
In fact, sometimes the works that you see that you don't own can stay with you as a feeling for such a long time.
Yeah.
I wrote down, I was thinking about it in terms of, if you think about how a lot of quite, whether it's Māori art, whether it's classical artworks, there was always so much symbolism that was woven through. And if you look at, that if you understood some of those pieces of symbolism, whether it's from carving, whether it's a particular pattern, or whether if it's a sort of a portrait and there's a little lapel with a particular kind of brooch which signifies things, there's so much that can be read out of all of the symbolism within it. But at the end of the day, it's actually it's that whole and how it kind of impacts on you that you then take away. Some of the most important pieces of art in terms of my own kind of what I've taken through as motivation are pieces that I have seen in museums, or pieces that I've seen in other people's homes that you go, I don't quite know what it was, but it has moved me on some fundamental level, and I want to take that feeling of it with me. I think, when I mentioned earlier in relation to comics, which is of course a very strong, my bookshelves are full of comics from all over the world. And I think I was reflecting on this in relation to this topic today, that before I could read, when I was younger, you could read a comic book just with the stories. You get through the action of what's happening, what the story is. Then you could read it as well later and go, in many instances it's very similar, but it's not always the same. But actually later on, when I think about a particular comic that I really like, it's actually the sensation of reading and participating in that comic. It's not actually that particular picture. It's not actually that particular speech bubble. It is that journey that it has taken me on, and something about it that has filled me with an intense feeling of, I couldn't tell you why one particular artist and story writer was one that I enjoyed more than another, except that there was something that I connected with. Yes.
I think that's an important word, connection. And people do connect in all sorts of ways. Some people will sing to a work. That happened to Arta Paul.
I think it triggers a psychic shift. Something changes in us when we engage with art and literature. I think that's its kind of purpose.
It also helps us, I think, on a certain level, not to feel alone in our experience, even if the way in which something is presented. Now, looking at your work, Ashley, my face was right up on the screen, looking at the different line work and the aspects that were in there, going, and then the idea around fish, it being about shark fins, going, I can see all these wonderful details. I could spend hours just kind of, it's like a. When you watch fish and you can just watch them for a really long time, and you're totally engrossed in their world. But it is also that aspect of when you are engaging with somebody else's creativity, that you don't, whether it's particularly often with stories, but also with art, where you don't feel as alone in your own experience of the world. Even if it is abstract, it can somehow just make you feel connected to your humanity in there.
And for me, why I started writing as a queer Māori writer was because I did feel really isolated in my experience. So it works the other way as well.
Yes.
That's wonderful. I really love the way that in lots of ways we've kind of, I've put out a question about whether the terms art and storytelling are actually useful, or if they've been outdated or outmoded. And from the korero that we're having here, I think that in many ways it doesn't answer that question as a final concrete answer, but it certainly raises questions about the terms the words that we use, that we have to use because we don't have other words to discuss the work that we make. And perhaps in some ways we've kind of come full circle and come to probably a really nice point to leave the discussion. I think we're kind of, Yeah, I think we're at our time at the moment. We can go over, but if everyone's happy to leave it there, if anyone has any more comments or anything else that they'd like to add, please do.
I'll just add one little thing, is that some of the work I've made that's actually not permanent has had the most impact on people. So sometimes I've made works out of like wax and sugar that dissolve over time, or in the space that I have in Namutu. The reason I opened it is because I didn't want it to be a traditional gallery. I had been installing work outside for a number of years where it would just dissolve and disappear, like unfired clay and like handmade paper prints and stuff that, you know, were okay to be left to the wind and such. And over the summer, I grew a lawn inside this space. The space is only as wide as my arms and about 15 paces long. And so I brought in soil and seed. There's lots of natural light, but no really direct light. And over 6 weeks, I just grew grass.
Wow.
And that people are still talking about that today. Like it's something you see every day, right? All the time outside. And so, but the fact that I sort of brought it indoors, and it wasn't until the act of doing it and walking in there every couple of days and having to water it, did I realize that this is the first time I've lived anywhere beyond 2 years since I was 18. So it was like that storytelling coming from making the work again. Like you were saying, Noah, yeah, like a lot of times it's not till afterwards, or you're, you know, that you're kind of reflecting on it, that the meaning comes to you. So, yeah.
So lots of times in lots of ways, the time of an artwork exists. It comes from long before and it will go on for long after.
Right.
Yeah. So I'd just like to finish to thank you all for a really exciting and interesting. I feel like I've learned heaps from all of you, and loved seeing all of your work. Really enjoyed seeing your work. I'm going to look you up and find out some more about you and about your work. It's been a real pleasure to moderate this panel, because I've been able to do some research beforehand, and I've really felt like I'd got to know all of you a lot from things that have been published about you. So ngā mihi kia koutou katoa, and we'll end here, and once again a big thank you to Michelle and a big thank you to all of you, and hope we meet again soon. Kia ora koutou.
Kia ora.
Good night.
Good
Thank
night.
you very much.
Good night, Dash.